Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce our next AP Research student. This is Anirudh, and he's going to be talking to you about a very interesting economic project that he's been working on. Anirudh?
All right,
Let's give him a round of applause.
So hello, my name is Anirudh, and this is my AP Research project on using predictive analytics and the profit to margin ratio to forecast company growth or decay for various companies, and I'll go further in detail. So here's some background information in the various components that make up this study. So basically, predictive analytics is the science of implementing various tools and techniques to forecast a value or estimate a value based on its present value. And that's according to Dr. Strickland. And this has become its own branch of science recently, and it's picked up rapidly over the past few decades. You might have heard of Google and Amazon. They use predictive analytics all the time. And so, according to Eggerson, the power of predictive analytics in the real world is you can anticipate problems before they happen. And this is very useful through a company's perspective, because they can alter their course and they can change their pathway so they can avoid these potential pitfalls and actually turn around their company from dire consequences to prosperity, whether it be through money or whether it just be through increase in sales. So, to go through, what is the profit margin ratio? It's actually a ratio that's based on profitability, and what it is net income over total net revenue, and that's all in US dollars because the companies using the study are based in US dollars, as I'll explain later. And the final product is expressed as a percentage. And this profit to margin ratio plays a pivotal role through the study, because this is what's used to forecast these values, and that's what's going to be used to determine and see how close I was to companies, and I'll get further into detail to that. Okay, and so to actually do the forecasting, I use the Tableau software, which is an open platform software. It's available for all. It's on the public domain, and it's a visualization software that can do actionable insights. So you can so companies can see the results and use them immediately and effectively, so they can alter that course as I was saying before. This actionable insights are really important because you can see here, this is a graph right here, and this is some random sample company, it doesn't matter, but you can see right here, if I was predicting 2015 value, you can see right there I was looking for that number, and I can see, okay, we're going to grow. From an investor perspective, you can see that, because if I was to invest in this company, I can tell that, okay, so my investment is actually pretty stable, I won't lose a lot, but there are fluctuations, and I'll come later in limitations. So this all leads to my research question of how can predictive analytics using Tableau software be used to predict companies' growth and decay for companies that use Informatica, which is a technical data company, as their technical data analysis method and are based in the United States. So these specific lists of companies play a crucial role throughout this thing, and you can see that that fills in a certain gap that I'll go into later. But Informatica, basically, just to go over that real quick, Informatica is a company that basically does kind of what I did in this study, but they do it on a much larger scale. They use many more companies all around the world. And so what Informatics is the actual software they use that they develop themselves in the company. And so these companies use them as theirs. So they are customers of Informatica, and that Informatica takes their data, and how I kind of took their data in this study, and analyze those data, and they report back to that company saying, you know what, you're going to look at some loss soon, so you might want to fix yourself. And so basically, this is like the large scale of my study, and mine's kind of more of basic predictive analytics, and it's kind of just a starting. So how did I come down to these research companies? So the companies I chose, I said in the question, are based in the United States, and they're all customers of the Informatica company. And so what I went around is I went to their actual website and I looked down at their customers list, and I picked companies that actually have the proper annual reports, and they're actually all based in the United States. And what based means is it's headquartered, it was founded in the United States, because you know, in a globalized world, there's a lot of outsourcing that goes around. So it's headquartered in the United States, it was started in the United States. So here's the actual research companies that did, and these are in alphabetical order. So we have ADP, Amarin, Aspen Technology, Chase Bank, eBay, Electronic Arts or EA, FedEx, Hewlett Packard or HP, Intuit, Motorola, Nordstrom, Qualcomm, T-Mobile, Verizon, and Wendy's. So not only do these companies fit this certain gap and fulfills that gap for the study, these actually, though there's some overlap, represent a variety of industries. You can see like restaurant industries, telecommunication industries, and that's actually a finding that I found later, that how industry plays a role in predictive analytics and predicting companies. So the methodology that I approached for this study was I took the profit to margin ratios, which was the net income over total net revenue for each annual report. So I studied 2005 to 2014, that's 10 years worth of data, and I predicted 2015, so I could use that number to actually compare to the actual 2015 value that was found in the annual reports. So the profit margin ratio is net income over total net revenue for each company. And there's 10 data points for each company, and over the 15 companies that were listed, that's 150 data points that I look at, and I upload those actually into the Tableau software, and I use that to predict. And so the Tableau software then in that case will be used so I put the data into the Tableau software, and what it does is it graphs it for me, and then I use a forecast function that's built inside the public domain of the Tableau software. And what that does is it uses complex algorithms, and it uses kind of machine learning, kind of basic artificial intelligence to predict the 2015 value, and I record all of this data. And so after I got my results, I noticed that I'll go into this later in the presentation, but I noticed this trend of industries, and there's certain patterns that you can find. And so for my data analysis, I kind of broke it into sub-intervals, and those percentage intervals I can compare, and those kind of error range, and I'll go more in depth into that when we get there. And all this data is stored in Excel, that's where I keep it, and then I upload it onto the Tableau software, and then I can kind of re-upload it back onto the Excel. So just an example of how the data storage is. You can see stored in Excel. This is one of the companies, Amarin. So you can see on the first column is just years, 2005, 2014. I don't put the 2015 value yet until after I get my results, because I don't want that to bias my report or say that, okay, I want something to kind of go down, or I want something to kind of go up when I look for a 2015 value. And the second is profit and loss or net income. The third column is total net revenue or sales. The final column is the profit margin ratio calculated. And I translated all these numbers for each and every company into millions of dollars, so it's kind of normalizes the data. And so here are the actual results. So we have these 15 companies. The bolded companies have this difference you see on this last column right here, have a difference that is greater than plus or minus 5%. And that, in this study, I call that the error range. And so if it's greater than plus or minus 5%, in this study I'm calling that as kind of an inaccurate or not as accurate as the other predictions as you can see here. So you can see like some of the really close ones. You have here Amarin, which was only 0.510% off, which is very close. And even these companies that are negative 11% off or 7.5%, almost 7.5% off, it's not a lot considering that these companies work in millions of dollars every year. And so in total that's equating to a few tens of thousands of dollars. On our scale, from an investor point of view, that might be a lot of money. From a corporate point of view, that's not too much of a loss. So these predictions in the real world are actually considered real accurate, but for this study, it's a little bit inaccurate compared to the others. So you can see here that we have the different industries. These are actually just alphabetical order, they're not broken down in industries. And there's some actually really interesting findings you'll find out here. And that leads to this whole discussion and analysis. So as you can see, 11 out of the 15 companies were predicted accurately compared to the other 4 which were not predicted as accurately. You can tell, so you can look, if we just go real quick into this, you can see Aspen Technology was negative 11% off, almost negative 11% off, compared to, say, Motorola, which is also 7.446% off. So basically, even if it's negative % off, like if it's in the negatives and it's off, that still proves valuable for the company, as if you're, say you're a company, say you're Aspen Technology, and your prediction is you're going to drop, or you're going to, okay, so you say your prediction is that you're going to rise 15.820%, because that's the predicted value in the third column, but you actually grew 26%, what you see is you don't actually see a loss to your company, because you're trying to say, so if you're trying to be like, okay, I predicted 18%, but I actually grew 26%, which means I grew more than I predicted, which is a necessary loss, which actually benefits you because you actually have more revenue now, more sales, and you don't have to actually alter your course because of the detrimental effects. Same holds true for the other side though. So if you were to predict a company and it was low, if you predicted low and it actually dropped, then you see an unexpected turn. So predictive analytics may be a powerful tool right now, but it does have the potential to go both ways, and that comes later under limitation. And so you can see by industry, and that's really what was interesting about this study for me. And the results, I was just looking at different predictions in the beginning, but then when I got my results, I noticed that certain industries portray certain trends, and some industries don't portray those same trends. So you can see Aspen Technology and Hewlett-Packard HP are both the same industries. They come under the software industry, well, their basis is the software industry. But you can tell that Aspen Technology was off, according to the error range was negative 11% almost, and HP wasn't as off as Aspen Technology because it was only 1.134%, which is actually very close to the zero value that we're looking for, because in an ideal situation you want to have a perfect prediction. So in this you can tell that maybe the software industry just has too much fluctuation to deduce down to one conclusion that you can easily predict it using this predictive analytics method. And you could compare that to others, like Verizon has negative 3.48% compared to T-Mobile, which is much closer to zero, negative 0.87%, which is not even negative 1% actually. So you can tell that certain industries, you can say maybe the mobile industry, or Verizon and T-Mobile, they're part of the mobile industry, you can figure out that that industry may be easier to predict, and maybe this sort of methodology and these tools can be used greatly more in that industry compared to the software industry. And one other major finding I found was Motorola and Qualcomm. They're both part of the telecommunications equipment industry, both major corporations all based in the United States, but they both were off over 5%. You can see Motorola was a little bit closer to 5% range, but for the study, the error range was still considered inaccurate. And that came down to the pattern that maybe the telecommunication industries is actually much harder to predict, and that because of fluctuations, because of the rapid growth in technology, we've had cell phones and smartphones come out very quickly within the last few decades, that telecommunications, they're expanding a different way. And the way they're growing is much different compared to these other industries, and there might be another predictive analytics tool, there might be a different methodology to figure out how to actually analyze these Motorola Qualcomm, and that's our future research to find out. So the significance of this whole entire study is that from a company's perspective, as I said before, if you can anticipate problems beforehand, and you know that your company is going to get a loss, you know you're going to lose customers for whatever reason, and that predictive analytics is going to find out, because it only takes less than an hour for each company to truly figure this out if they wanted to. And that, through that company's significance, they can find out that I need to change this course, or something's going wrong, and they can figure out something else, and it's really significant. It's really, it's a beautiful tool for companies. The more than investor significance, if you're investing in a company, or anyone's investing, or has already invested, that investment can be seen as you can figure out the stability of that investment. And that's also one of the crucial roles of the profit margin ratio. It tells you the stability of the profit in the company to a certain extent. And so the investors can figure out that, I better pull out my money in this company because it's going to fall. And that also signals an alarm to the company saying, we're having investors pulling out, so something must be going on. So this basic predictive analytics with this study can be applied on a much larger scale, in a much larger environment that can be used for many more companies and a larger pool to figure out what's going to happen to the company, what's going to happen to their money, because in a world where we live, money is really important. So there are some limitations as to any study. There's some limitations to my study. That the amount of data points was limited. It was only 10 for each company. And I would definitely like, if there was more time allotted, I would definitely love to look into more data points and go back as far as I can and find kind of an equal point. And there's only a few metrics that were measured for the profit to margin ratio. It was only the net income and the total net revenue. And the entirety of a company comes from more than just those few metrics. So if I had more time, I could look into more of those stuff, and that's one of those limitations. Also, the fluctuations in just the general American economy. The recession that happened in 2007, that may affect the numbers necessarily, but it might have showed lower numbers in general, and that when you're looking at a prediction kind of standpoint, that numbers, if it's lower, you're going to predict a little bit lower than what your actual will be. That's why some of the companies were negatives compared to positives. And companies analyze and might bias their numbers because, companies like to make their companies seem really rich. They like to seem that they tweak the numbers, they tweak the statistics to make it look they're more prosperous, that their company is growing more rapidly than any other company. These are just a few limitations, but nevertheless, the prediction was 11 out of 15 companies, and that's, in my terms, and on a more global scale, some might consider 15 out of 15 companies. And the purpose of the study was achieved, and the purpose was, can predictive analytics be used, can predictive analytics be used to determine company growth or decay. And that was achieved because I figured out that 11 out of 15 companies I can predict fairly accurately. The other 4 weren't too off, but they were not considered perfectly accurate for this error range. And predictive analytics is a great tool. As I've just mentioned, it can accurately predict company growth or decay, and you could use it even more in stock markets. You could use it even implement it into more sports and any kind of industry. You could use predictive analytics, and that's where it's really headed. And that's where the future is going towards when it comes to predictive analytics. So some future directions for future researchers to take is, 1, you can use more data points. Definitely a lot of future researchers can use much more data points and see if that affects the growth or that affects the prediction made. And they could definitely build upon the patterns found today. So I mentioned telecommunications industry, I mentioned the mobile operation industry. They can build upon these patterns using those extra data points. On top of that, future research can use this to predict stock market. Because everyone's been trying to predict the stock market, but it fluctuates way too much. And maybe predictive analytics is that stepping stone to actually predict what happens in the stock market, whether it be a global economy or just a domestic American economy. So basically, in conclusion, predictive analytics is a vast universe that's just expanding as we speak today, and there's much potential to it, and it's going to go very far. It's a beautiful tool to use. Thank you.
Okay, Andrew, very nice presentation. Thank you. As you know, I have 3 questions for you. The first question, what was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research, and why was it important?
Okay, so the most important source I actually found was through a UK paper that listed a bunch of methodology to predict UK business company failures in the construction industry. And before that, I wasn't sure how I was going to analyze this data and how was I going to use the numbers to actually predict. And that paper showed me that there's something called the profit margin ratio, which is very easily accessible and can easily be calculated. And so that paper really was very significant for this, and it really helped me because I could use that paper, and that's what really led to this whole entire results in this paper.
All right, very good. All right, my second question, what additional questions emerged during your research? And based on your recent experience, what advice would you give to other researchers who might choose to investigate those questions?
Okay, so some questions that actually emerged throughout my paper or throughout my study came when I saw the results. I was wondering what happens if I maybe apply this to a stock market? Can I use profit to margin ratios and use that to determine a stock market value or general growth and decay? Because in the stock market, if you can just figure out growth and decay, that's important and that's good enough. So our question emerges, using my own study of profit to margin ratios, can I use those same values and kind of transpose it into the stock market and figure out the stock market values? And for future researchers, they can definitely do that. Future researchers, my advice is use as many data points as you get. Find a common ground that every company shares, because some companies store their annual reports on different servers or different domains. So you collect as many data points and use that, because the more data points, the more accurate your prediction actually is, and the more closer it be. So for future research, I'd say use that, and also try implementing it onto more of a stock market, larger scale. See what can be done with predictive analytics.
Okay, very good. And my final question, what unanticipated turn did you encounter as your research progressed? What were the reasons for this change in direction of focus, and how did you modify your method or approach?
Okay, so first I started with just a broad topic of just data science and economics. I really wanted to just go into using data and applying it because it was a really growing field and everyone was talking about it. It was the buzz of the town, right? And so what I actually did was, first, that was where I was going to approach. But then I realized, what is data science? What is economics? That could be anywhere, any path. So I kept narrowing down my focus. And I actually then narrowed it down to just using Amazon and predicting Amazon's growth, similar to this, but not necessarily using profit margin ratios or tablet software. And so when I tried to do that, though, there was no way that Amazon didn't really release the right information that I wanted to use to do my predictions. And I tried to use the same idea of profit margin ratios, but that wouldn't really work out for Amazon because it's a much larger scale. And Amazon does this different thing where they write as zero, they have a zero revenue, and that they technically make no profit, but they are making billions of dollars. So it was really a little bit funky for my project, and it really worked out for my study. So I had to change my methodology and kind of just go, okay, what happens if I just use different companies, different industries? And that's where I came down to these 15 companies using the profit to margin ratio.
Thank you. Audience, do we have any other questions or comments?
I noticed how you were talking using analytic data to create larger companies, but can it also be used for smaller companies?
Yes, definitely, yeah. So I use larger corporations because data is much more easier and accessible for me. But it can definitely be used for startups, personal businesses. Predictive analytics can be used on any stage. And it just gets harder as the more larger the companies. So on a personal business or a startup business, this can easily definitely be used and it can actually be very useful. Of course.